YouTube friends, what's going on? David Lee back with a brand new video. Today we're talking about having a lower f-stop or a image stabilized lens. Now you might be wondering to yourself, well obviously I want a faster lens, f1.8, f1.4. That's what's going to allow me to shoot at a lower ISO, meaning that there's less noise in my overall footage, right? But is it better to have a lower f-stop or have a somewhat lower f-stop but a lens that's stabilized? Now we can't always walk around with steady cams or gimbals. Well, I guess you could, but for someone like me, I'd rather not. So having an image stabilized lens at an f1.8 or even an f2, in my opinion, works out much better than having a f1.4, but with a lens that's not stabilized. Now, sure, you can always use something like a GorillaPod if you're doing run and gun filmmaking, or for many of us out there that are creating YouTube content, a GorillaPod is the easiest thing, it's probably the cheapest thing to have. And depending on what kind of camera you have and lens setup, it might be really easy to hold around for a couple hours during the day. But in order to create more dynamic and more creative shots, whether you're filming something that's narrative, documentary based, or even B-roll that we all need, sometimes a little GorillaPod isn't enough. So which is better, having a lower f-stop or having an image stabilized lens? Well, for those of us who are fortunate enough to have a stabilized sensor or in-body image stabilization in the camera, we don't necessarily have to have a lens that's also stabilized. Or what if you have a camera body that doesn't have any stabilization at all? Do you sacrifice a little bit of noise for steadier footage, or do you just say, well, I'll deal with it in post? Well, 80% of the time, if you deal with it in post with warp stabilization, sometimes it creates this, super fake and super digital stabilization that, in my experience, I would rather not have it at all. So a lens like the Sigma 35mm f1.4 Art, amazing lens, f1.4, it's probably one of the lowest f-stops you can get in a lens at this price, but it doesn't have image stabilization. So if you put this on a camera body without image stabilization, you're gonna have a tougher time stabilizing your footage. Now the other option we talked about is having an image stabilized lens. I'm really digging these new Tamron lenses, their SP line. I actually own the 24-70 G2 and this 45mm f1.8 with VC. Now just because it has VC doesn't mean that it's going to replace your Steadicam or your gimbal, but what it will do is help you shoot in lower light situations without so much like camera shake. And another thing about these SP lenses that I love is that they're fully weather sealed, whereas the Sigmas aren't. Now even though this 45mm lens is only f1.8 compared to the Sigma Art, which is f1.4, obviously ISO is going to be different. Instead of shooting at like ISO 320, you may have to go up to ISO 500. But if your shot requires something more dynamic or requires you to be moving, then having a stabilized lens honestly is better than having a little bit lower f-stop. So simply ask yourself these two questions. Number one, do you shoot a lot more lockdown shots, or do you always carry around your gimbal or Steadicam? If you do, then go with a lower f-stop or a faster lens. If you do a lot of handheld shots, a lot of guerrilla filmmaking or run and gun filmmaking, then it's better to have a stabilized lens than to have a lower f-stop. Noise reduction software, thankfully is pretty good these days, and you only pay a one-time fee whether you use something from Red Giant or need video. It's easier to denoise and renoise your footage than it is to try to, salvage shaky handheld footage that's going to take you painful hours trying to manipulate and edit in post. And for me, I do a lot of documentary work, and a lot of it is about discretion, having a small footprint, so I don't like to carry a Steadicam or gimbal at all. I will use something like a field monitor and also external recording to an XLR mic, but as far as having, a big thing around with me, it's not the best thing to do when you're just trying to be as discreet as possible. So an image stabilized lens really saves me during those times, which is more often than not. Ideally, if Sigma or whoever, Canon and Sony, actually came out with like f1.4, f1.6 lenses that were stabilized, I guarantee you there would be a lot of people buying all new lenses. But that does it for me, friends. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, just so you're notified of new content that's being released. Like the video down below if you liked it, and as always friends, remember that every day you have an opportunity to create your own experience and to write and tell your own story. My name is David Lee. I'll catch you guys in the next video.